Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm super excited to share with y'all today my new island that my husband redid for me, and it looks awesome. We made it into a farmhouse island. I don't have footage of how the island originally looked, but this is how the doors looked with the handle and just the stain that was originally on it. And here is the carcass of it. We are sanding it all down, that way when we apply the paint it will actually stick to it and it won't scratch off easily. And this is the awful countertop that we had. It was tiles and grout, and so it was really hard to clean, and that's why I really wanted to redo this, and I'm really glad we did. Of course I helped some. I started sanding the backside, but Joe had a really good idea that we should lay it down, so we placed it on top of the old counter and just let it sit on there. And then we realized there were a ton of spider eggs and everything at the bottom, so we decided to clean that up as well. But once we were done with that, I went back to sanding, and honestly I think this was what took the longest, was sanding, because we had to sand the whole carcass, then we had to sand the doors, and then we had to sand the faces of the drawers. This was a really important step to sand everything, just because if you don't, the paint will not adhere very well and it can scratch off really easily. I have these really cool sanding blocks that are used to sand weird shapes or just shapes that are routed out, and I'll link them below if you're interested in them. So what Joe did was he found the middle here. He marked the outside of the board here, and then he flipped this over. So when the board was flipped over, he just made sure to line it up in between there, and then this side over here, the line that was on this side, he lined it up with the corner there. And so it's lined up with the corner, and then he marked the outside of this board as well. And then when he wanted to go back and measure, he again flipped the board over, and to make sure it's lined up, you keep it between the marks here and then the marks here as well. But then he also, when he drew the lines on it with the ruler, he stayed in between there and found the center and went past it a little bit to make sure he had enough room, and he's going to have the perfect corner here. Joe used the pin nailer to nail the boards onto this island here, and now he's clipping the nails because they went pretty far through and we don't want anyone to get poked or cut. Now you can see what Joe's doing that I was talking about earlier with the doors, because he already applied the trim to the carcass of the cabinet to make the X's on there to give the farmhouse look. And so he's doing it onto the cabinet doors here, and he's basically using the ruler to mark it. And then he goes and he cuts his pieces. And then he overlaps them, and he uses the pencil to mark the underside to see how much he needs to cut off. He did play around with this, and it's better to overcut than undercut because there's no going back. So he kind of played around with it and would just cut a little bit off at a time once he cut the two pieces. And he would fit them into place to make sure they were nice and snug. Now there is a little bit of forgiveness when you do this, because you are using caulk and it can hide that there is a bigger gap than needs to be. Now we chose to caulk all the trim pieces that we put on, because if we didn't, you can see a nice dark shadow even after painting. So we didn't want to see any of that. We wanted it all to look like one piece. Joe bought this stuff right here that's supposed to make the paint go on smooth. And you mix 8 ounces of it into 1 gallon of paint, and I'm using white, of course. Now, I'm sure that stuff would have worked great had I measured right, but I did not. And so we started out painting and it did not do what it was supposed to do, but it was totally my fault. Here's how it looks with the cabinet doors on now. The hardware's painted. He used a flat black and it just looks so gorgeous. It's coming out good. We decided to stain the countertop in the house just because it was really cold outside and we wanted it to dry quickly. We used some cans of stain so that we could stain the sides and not get everything dirty. And then we chose to use L brackets to hold the counter in place. Then the faces of the drawers weren't on there centered properly, so we went ahead and we centered them and attached them where we wanted them. And then one of the last steps was to seal this. We used a clear flat, and I have to tell you guys, I absolutely love how this thing turned out. Check it out.